Okay. So the question again was about the timetable, and we're going to the village board meeting um, for the work session on Wednesday to give a brief summary about the draft police reform and reinvention collaborative report. Um, Based on the input from the board, we will come up with another draft report, I suppose, and then have a couple of public meetings probably in February to get the public's view on the report, and then take all of that input together and come up with a final report in middle March so that it can be submitted to the state to satisfy the requirements of Executive Order 203 by April 1st. So it's still all draft. So this meeting provides input on the draft report. The work session provides input, and then a couple of public meetings, as well as input received not just in the public meetings, but via email, text, etc., telephone calls to us about issues in that, and we consider all of that and then come up with a final report. And I would imagine that before we finalize it, we would have another working committee meeting just to wrap it up and to make sure you're good with it.
I have some questions about whether we're going to be doing iterative edits like in between. So if we have feedback after the board meeting that we want to make edits, you know, on that we don't need to have a public meeting for yet. Will we be editing it and then for the public meeting having a new version of the draft?
I think it probably does not make sense to do it. I've thought about that, and while there could be some advantages, if we have different versions of the report out there, it's going to be hard to discuss it in these various meetings. So I think we take all the input, we acknowledge that prior input has been made, and we can we're considering changes in the way that that input was received, and then come up with a final version of this thing that incorporates all of that, subject to the working committee's approval and I guess the board's approval sometime in March.
So after each meeting, such as this one, you will be doing updates to the document, and
No.
we'll do it progressively. No?
No, I'm saying that would be difficult because then people would be making comments on different versions of the report, and
Right.
it would be hard to figure out what they're making comments on. So I think we take in all the input from these various meetings and then come up with a final draft and then submit it as appropriate through this committee, the board, for final approval after a month of reviews.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
So do you think I'm a little uncomfortable with that, because I do want to make sure that, as you know, we've been talking just since we've seen the draft about changes that we might want to make to it. And I do want to make sure that when the public is seeing it, that they understand where we are at with the report, so that they understand where we're thinking. So one of the things that I was thinking about that might be helpful in bridging that gap is maybe if we, you know, track changes on the Google Doc itself, so that we're not changing, you know, the actual file that people are looking at if they have a link to it, but they can see where edits have been made and when those edits were made, and they can see what the previous version of it looked like. So is that something that we would want to consider?
That sounds good. Sorry for jumping in, but I think that could be done as well. And the changes or recommended changes would be done maybe in a different color ink or so on, just to keep track, maybe in red or something.
Yeah, Google has a feature where you can do that, and it does exactly like you described, Bishop Whitaker. It would show in a different color, and it's really clear that a change was made. The only thing there is that it can get really messy when there are lots of edits.
Right. Well, how about this as an alternative? What if we came up with a separate memo that was released that talked about some of the changes that we are considering to the draft as part of each of these reviews, and have that be an ongoing document? Because
I think that could work too.
I think you're right. I mean, if we, after say 3 or 4 meetings, we have this track change document, it's going to be really hard to follow the changes in the document.
Like from our perspective, you mean, or?
No, from anybody who looked at the document.
Yeah, those can get crazy.
So
I
I
think,
like the memo
I think,
idea.
Richard, you're also going to have to take into account that at some point, this part sort of comes to a sunset. And what comes to a sunrise is the public, because
Right.
any individual is now equal to the working committee.
Mhm.
An individual might see this and say, I want this added, I want that. So how would you take that all in?
Yeah.
Could be 50 individuals,
Yeah.
could be 100 individuals, could be 3. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know.
Right.
So I would just say, think about, you know, do you take all the individuals and then you all decide what goes in and what doesn't? That's the process, if that's explained. Or is it that once it's out in the public, which after next week it will be, you know, like once the legislative body says there's a public hearing, there needs to be a document that people reply to. And if that document changes a bit, that's one thing. If it changes a lot, and then you have to battle with yourselves about, what if this individual over here had a whole different idea? How
Right.
does that play into the plan that we're putting out there? You don't want parallel paths. You don't want 2 groups of 3. So I don't have a solution to that commentary I just made. I would just say that one of the ways we see, one of the ways, doesn't have to be what you guys do. One of the ways is that there's a due date. It's like school. There was a due date when the draft was due. It's basically sunsetting, meaning you could do a little bit here and there, but that's it. Now it gets handed off to the next level, which is the legislative body, which is the Board of Trustees. We will have some changes. Other people might, public might, residents, interested parties, they'll get added in, and that creates the final draft. Maybe it goes back to the working committee, maybe it doesn't. That's where I think you guys, like on the bigger level, need to discuss. I just can't help with, is it going to be 500 comments from one person, 500 people, each with a comment?
Mhm.
Who knows?
Yeah, I know. I think some of that is to be determined. I mean, in one way, everybody isn't equal in this because the working committee's been spending 3+ months working on this. So the process has been, in general, that we've had the working committee digging deeply into this, and then considering the input that we received through the survey, through the various listening sessions, and other forms of communication. All of that has come up to be represented in this draft plan. So we will be getting comments on that. So since the working committee has been charged with coming up with the plan, then we take these various ideas for changes, new ideas, less ideas, whatever, to the committee, and we have a process for agreeing for inclusion or change or deletion or whatever.
Right,
And-
but there needs to be a cutoff date. Then there needs to be a date when you say no more.
I think that date would be something like March 1st. Because
I didn't hear you, Richard. Did you say March 1st?
yes, because I think it as a practical matter, you should have the final report for submission in the middle of March, so you're not doing it on March 31st at 11:58. So you need a week or 2 to have it and do with it what you want in terms of packaging it. Maybe there's a village, letter of transmission or something, a middle or something like that. So we would have a couple of weeks then at the beginning to the middle of March to compile all the various edits into a final report before March 15th, say, have another committee meeting just to finalize it.
Right, because the board also needs minimally a week, and actually March 31st is not it's a 5th Wednesday. It's actually, we would have to call a special meeting. The board meets working sessions 2 Wednesdays a month generally. The others are legislative session. And we're okay with that, but the 31st happens to be a Wednesday, but that's late. Because,
No,
but
yeah.
again, I think you need to speak to the village manager.
Okay, we'll do. So all I'm saying is that February is going to be the input month.
Yeah,
We'll wrap it up.
yeah.
Whatever those dates work out to be.
When are the next public engagement meetings going to happen?
We don't know yet. Those are to be determined. We're going to have to, I would imagine that when in a meeting, in the meeting with the village manager tomorrow, we could discuss that, but
Clearly, it won't be happening before March 1st.
oh, sure.
Right.
We did the other ones with a week or two planning. So we could get them for, so say this was released publicly right after this meeting. We could have meetings, I don't know the days of the week, but something around the 15th of February and the 22nd of February, or dates around there, and would have enough time to publicize it.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So do we know how many of these we want to have? We need to have 2 at minimum for English and Spanish, but I don't know if we want to have more than that.
I think our proposal at the beginning, or the RFP, I think, asked for 2 meetings on the draft. So that's a good number. If it's 1 in English and 1 in Spanish, perhaps we should consider a third one.
It would be a good, could be a good idea to put together, not just for us as a committee, but so that the public knows, maybe a timeline
Mhm.
starting from when you started, going through dates of when we met, and maybe itemizing dates of our goals, so that people have a better understanding of kind of what we've been doing and what our next steps are. I think that's the biggest feedback I've heard, is that some people are just kind of confused about what we're doing. And I'm kind of confused about the next step. So maybe we could, you could put a timeline together of kind of what we've done, and even if we don't have, like you said, the public engagement date totally set, we could just, in parentheses say maybe the 22nd, maybe this, just so, and then we can get that up on the village website,
Yeah.
so that we could share with people. I think it would help kind of the process a little bit.
That's a good idea. I'll talk, when I talk to the village manager, I would imagine that one thing that's going to help in the structure of the situation for Wednesday is that rather than talking about this report in its totality in the form that it's in, is put together something like a PowerPoint summary. And we had a history of the working committee meetings in the report. So take that as when I'm talking about the history of what we've done, but then toward the end, have a next steps kind of PowerPoint page in which we just lay out a process that gets to the submission to the state. So that would include a couple of public meetings in the second half of February, making revisions, a final board meeting, and then submission.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that'll help kind of bridge between the public, our committee, you. I think that'd be great.
Okay.
With the mayor and some others, but
And how many public meetings are we having?
We are required to have 2 as part of this process.
We had 3 last time, right?
We did. We could do 3.
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think so also.
I think the African American community should have one.
And the Spanish speaking.
Yes.
Mhm.
I
And everybody else.
think that we should give Richard some proposed dates so that when he goes to meet with the village manager, it's all, kind of one and done of what we're planning on doing moving forward. So if there are any tentative dates that anybody has, I think we should give it to him.
Yeah. That'd be,
So do we have preferences between either like weekends or weekdays?
I think it was helpful having one weekend date the first time around. I mean, we had, I think, the most number of people at the Saturday morning meeting. I think it peaked at 85. So we could have that, but an evening meeting is good too. different people have available times. But that's really up to you. Whatever works.
So I'm looking at a calendar now. It looks like we've got 4 Saturdays in February. The first one is the 6th, that's next week, probably not gonna work. So then our options are the 13th, the 20th, and the 27th if we want to do a Saturday meeting.
Remember, the 13th is a holiday weekend. I don't know if that impacts matters.
Oh yeah, I don't know. During
During the
COVID.
time of COVID,
Right.
nobody's going away local. Um, do you think the 20th of February is good? Or the 6th is better?
The 6th will be difficult. I mean, if you don't think there's a problem with the 13th, then the 13th and the 20th work well.
Okay. Do we want to keep it on a Saturday and not a weeknight?
Well, if we're going to have 3, we could have both.
Okay.
Does anyone have preferences otherwise? And are we talking about the Saturday meeting being the open one like we did last time?
Probably. Yeah.
I just want to remind you that unless it's done at the BOT meetings, which is what they're typically, not that you can't do it this way, but unless it's done at the BOT level, meaning on the working Wednesdays where the meetings are actually scheduled for already.
Right.
Once we call it to be for public hearing to review this, the 5 board trustees may or may not be available to hear it. And if they are, we have to announce these at least 7 days in advance. The public hearings are actually supposed to be taking part during either legislative sessions or work sessions on Wednesdays. That is actually the point of a public meeting. Public engagement meetings are different. It's not that you can't have them. You then will have to summarize all of the commentary made. Recordings are not going to be enough. There are going to be different comments that are applicable. I don't have a preference one way or the other, but for the BOT to have it and to then have it as part of a public meeting, those are the Wednesday meetings. We can call a special meeting, which we were thinking of doing in the middle somewhere, but just adding that commentary to this conversation.
So,
The BOT meetings are significantly different than public engagement meetings.
Right.
Both are fine, but just sort of giving you the lay of the land here where the attorneys are present, the village manager and staff, those are what we hold on Wednesdays. These are different. Again,
right.
let me know, but just putting it out there.
I think we're talking about a combination of meetings. The executive order requires a public meeting of the governing body to adopt it for submission to the state. So clearly that meeting at a minimum has to happen, the meeting that we're talking about, sometime in March. And then we got this work session to roll out the preliminary review, the initial review of the draft. But the things we've been talking about in between are like the public listening sessions that we did in the earlier phase of the project. So is that your idea of what it is, or are they all public meetings of the governing body?
Well, I think there's a public hearing that is a specific type of public meeting, and that is, I believe, what the mayor is talking about.
Yeah. So that again is what we were talking about for March. So these 2 meetings that we're talking about, in 3 meetings we're talking about in February, are more like the public listening sessions that we had in November, December. They're not hearings. They are public.
Sorry, I came on late. I thought I had written down that the meeting was at 5:30. So the meetings, I just have a question about the meetings. The meetings that will be with the community, will it be more led by Matrix or led by maybe the working committee? Maybe like going over the draft? Is that what we're doing? Or just presenting because I feel like it might be useful for the community to also interact with the working committee and kind of, have them ask us questions or, like really more of like a panel instead of just the discussion. I think that that's what people might have missed, like seeing who's really behind this and wanting to know who they can speak to in the community later on, right? Like if they feel more comfortable speaking to myself or someone else like out in the community, then they would know who to reach out to, like a friendly face kind of. I don't know if that makes sense. To engage with us or give us their suggestions that way as well.
I think that's a really good idea, or maybe some hybrid of that, because I think there has to be a point at which it's not just a consultant-led feeding the community with these things, that there has to be some ownership at this point, and that's why the working committee was developed. So I think some hybrid approach would be a really good idea that involve both the working committee and the consultants.
So to answer your question, Maite, with the best ability that I have is that at this point we are we have a draft of the report, and this is the draft that we're now looking to get feedback from the public on. And this is between now and the end of February what we're looking to do. So the first step in the process is sharing it publicly, and that's going to happen on Wednesday with the board. That's the first time that the public is going to have an opportunity to see it. Now, because it was part of the agenda, it was published on Friday, so it is technically public already. Any universe can access it from the village website, but what we are doing is having an initial presentation and then getting folks to be able to understand the history up until that point, and now a consolidation of all of the data that went into it, all of the listening sessions, all of the working committee work, all the subcommittee work, all of that has culminated into this report. And what we're trying to do now is get feedback on that report. There's a minimum threshold of feedback that we need to get before we can submit it to the state, which is doing it in a public session in this way. But there are even more and better ways of getting feedback. And so we're trying to go above and beyond. That's what these additional public feedback sessions are all about. So the idea is we can, in the same way that we did before, have specific populations in mind with these public forums or listening sessions or feedback sessions, and we can take the lessons that we learned from last time. So last time we differentiated them in ways that were responsive to those different populations. Sometimes that was helpful, sometimes it was not, and so we can adjust this time to either make them all the same or adjust them in ways that, again, make sense given the distinct populations. And then from there, looking ultimately to get to the point that when we have a report that we're submitting to the state, we can say we've had an opportunity and we've made a real intention for the public to be able to see what's going on. But what we're trying to do now is, number one, get some of those dates locked down so that we understand what they are. We're talking about for the general population of the village on a Saturday, on a weekday, and then maybe something else for the African-American population, for the Spanish-speaking population. So that may be already 4, right? 2 general population, 1 evening, 1 weekend, 1 for the African-American community, 1 for the Spanish-speaking community. That's 4. And we've only talked about 1 date, 1 Saturday date. So we'll need to confirm the other 3, at the very least, to get proposed dates that we can then via email get feedback on if those aren't the right ones. But that's where we are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So For the PowerPoints, for the summary, that'll be at the work session. As we've been saying, we will want to lay out a process at the end of the summary that lays out the review process through the completion of the report that goes to the state. We'll give some, I think we better give some actual dates. So I think we better agree on them now in terms of one Saturday and a couple of other evenings, because otherwise this will drag on for another several days. So was the feeling that the
So if I can jump in, Richard. So my recommendation would be to start with Kendall. Kendall, knowing the NAACP schedule, which is like they tend to have meetings on Thursdays, and other community groups that may be interested, that are focused on the African American population. Is there a day of the week that you think would be more effective? And if so, like what date would you recommend that we do it?
It depends. A day of the week or weekend, or I mean, is that optional? Or that should be optional, right?
I sure that is totally optional.
Yeah. I think well, last one was a weeknight. I think a weekend would probably be more effective. You know, perhaps a Saturday, like we did the other ones. Maybe 1 o'clock on a Saturday.
So what does the weekend after?
Yeah.
So not the 12th, but is it the 20th? What was it?
The 20th would be a good week.
So we do the 13th for the general one and the 20th one for the African American community.
There it is.
Did we
You're
say
talking about February, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
we're not subscribing to a particular day amount of meetings, right? Because if we're not bound by that, I think it'd be maybe preferable if it made sense to have one on a Saturday and one on a weeknight for the African American population.
So I think the only limitation, Ro, is number one, the capacity that the working committee has to be able to be there to manage it. Two, if we're using the Village Zoom webinar feature and all of that, then it is staff time, and we need to figure out what the capacity is there. If not, then they would need to designate someone to be managing the Zoom. So if let's say Kendall says, I'll be responsible for whatever number of sessions that we do in terms of managing the Zooms, of managing the invitations, the communications, the project managing the whole thing. I think that's the only limitation at this point. Beyond that, I don't think anybody's opposed to having any number of sessions.
And
it's just who's going to do the work.
And the consultants.
Correct, and the consultants.
Right. And the consult, yeah.
I mean, I prefer weekends. A lot of you know my schedule. For me, the weekends personally are preferable, but they're not always for others.
What about the dedicated one for Spanish speakers?
What about the what?
What day of the week? We had the last one on the Thursday, and
Spanish speaking
was not well attended, but there was not a lot of lead time, and we did not have the opportunity to get other promotional connections to make people aware of it. So I think that was a problem. So it would be good to do that one later in the month again. Maybe try for a weekend again.
I think that's best. Yeah.
So one of those weekends then, unless we did the 27th, so 3 consecutive Saturdays, 13th, 20th, and 20th.
That could work.
Okay, that's what we'll do then. So let's try to do that.
Could we get like Neighbors Link or somebody to promote this out?
Yeah.
I don't know if they have,
I mean, the hope is that everybody on this work committee, not all of you, but many of you are members of multiple relationships, so send them out. The more the merrier. That's the hope, actually.
Will the links to the meeting be going out on the village site as they did the last time? I believe they should.
They were really good. They were really helpful. And having the graphic exchange there, having the link that was there, I think was really, really helpful. For a
Yeah,
couple.
I think it was for 2 of them anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Could we get those sent to us when they are ready? Because I know I didn't realize that they were out and ready to go until I saw one in like an email or something that I got, like a village email.
Okay. Well, when I talked to Karen, the village manager, and probably Jamie, the assistant who manages all of that, we'll try to get that as quickly as possible so that they can create the link and we can get it out to everybody even before the graphic is developed and put on the website and shared for other social media, like NeighborLink.
Yeah, if possible, can we have that like as soon as possible?
Yeah.
Like prior to the 1st, like we need to be able to really push and promote this.
Promote, yeah.
And you know, and exhaust all avenues. So if we can get this, I mean, I'm like, I think it was Jen that said, we can take the link before the graphic. So we can at least just start giving people the heads up and letting them know what's going on.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah,
This
absolutely.
is the village link you're referring to, right, Alfima?
Yeah, this is the link for the Zoom, just
Right.
everything, you know.
Right,
so
okay.
get it
The
as soon as
official,
possible.
yeah, village link. So the 13th was the general meeting and the 27th, the Spanish speaking, or do I have that twisted? Was that correct?
That's what we said, but we could flip
Okay.
at this point. I think the Spanish speaking meeting is going to need the most advanced time.
But I also was under the impression, and might say, correct me if I was wrong, that you we were talking about Facebook being a better avenue for that community. So if that's the case, then maybe can we try it through there so we can get the community?
So I was thinking like about, you know, the platform, right? Like how are we going to reach out to them? I think maybe keeping it to the invitation to Zoom might be a good idea. Just doing more of the promotional and on Facebook. Same for NAACP if it works for that, or LGBTQ plus or whatever. You know, I know that Facebook for the Latinx community is very useful. I don't know what works for everyone else, but I will do a better job at pushing on there. I don't know about holding the meeting on there. I don't know what you guys think. Then I think we might have to do Facebook for everybody else. I don't know.
I think promoting on Facebook is good, but
I
the
think
Zoom meetings, we should continue to do the Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
So you can
something-
also,
Oh.
so if I could just jump in, you can also simulcast it on Facebook.
Oh,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was going to be my next thing. We can simulcast.
Yeah.
Although I
that's
have
what we
no
can do
idea how
for
that works.
everyone.
Yeah, I think every meeting, everybody's on Facebook. I don't see why every meeting shouldn't use Facebook as a tool.
Yeah, we should do that for everyone then, because
Yeah.
we can get more interaction.
I think simulcasting is a great idea.
Does anyone know how to do that though? Because I know it's a thing, but I have,
It's
I
just a
believe
link
it
you
might be
click
the
on your
webinar.
you basically just click the link inside of the Zoom. I'm sure that Jamie and them know how to do it.
Can we get feedback or from the people on Facebook at the same time so that we can answer questions or things like that?
So I know for from some of the events that I've done, when you want to use Facebook, and it depends. I don't know if we're using the Village's Zoom webinar account or Matrix, because I believe you have to have webinar to simulcast it to Facebook. What you could do is, what I've done in the past is one of the members kind of monitors Facebook and then, you know, sends the questions over, because you have to kind of be looking at two screens. So let's just say, okay, I'll be the Facebook watcher. I could either put in the chat or in the Q&A section, this question is from someone, you know, from Facebook. You can do that. Or have you could have someone just be the person interacting specifically with Facebook, but if it's set up in the webinar, you just click Facebook and it automatically goes. You know, it just depends on what organization you'd like it to stream from, or if it's from the village's official one.
Just a comment. I think a meeting on Zoom is more localized. I think it will remain within the confines of our region. But Facebook, I am not sure I would like my face to be in the Caribbean and Africa when it comes to something like this. And that's what Facebook does essentially. It's going to really take it to the entire world.
So I think the one response that I would give to that is two things. One, that's it's the same. That's actually the same with Zoom. So once we put the Zoom link out there, anybody from around the world can access it and join. Is that geo limited in any kind of way? But two is that we can use our discretion with this whole thing, right? So the Zoom is moderated. Facebook can be moderated in such a way that if somebody's either being disrespectful or unhelpful, they can be removed from it. And if somebody's saying something that is not disrespectful, but just generally unconstructive, then we can take the comment and then move on. But I think that the benefits of the feedback that we might get, as opposed to the risks of somebody saying, I don't like this idea that's in there, the benefits outweigh the risks, as I see it.
I think you're right on that.
We also could do
Omar, I don't know if you finished, but you look like you're on mute.
Yes, I'm on mute. I finished.
You were saying, Christina?
I was just saying we could do individual graphics like before. We also could do one graphic with all 3 dates.
Yeah.
Just to, even if it doesn't have, so we're promoting a couple of graphics, one being individual, and then one just maybe all 3, so that people can just see we've got 3 Saturdays. You know, please check, you know, the village website or wherever these are going to be, where you would find the link. Because people take up information different ways, and some of them will see the one graphic with the Zoom link and all the information. Others may just want like the 3 in a row. And I'm more than happy to help with the graphics. I made the one for the LGBTQ one. So I'm happy to help if it's needed.
Okay, I'll mention that to Jamie when we talk tomorrow or before the meeting.
Yeah, I think it would be important to just put out a graphic that says these are the next steps, even if it's not the dates, but it's like potential dates, weekends in February, like to be determined, but like kind of, what is it called? Like a hold the
infographic.
Yeah, but like more like
save the date.
Save the date.
Yeah, like save the date, because I think people are wondering like, where are we? What's going on? So, you know, like we can say we're ready to present soon the draft to you in February, you know.
Yeah,
out for these dates.
And I'm not sure if you were on yet, but we did discuss releasing a timeline of our next steps, and also what we've done before, because the biggest thing I've been seeing is people are unsure like what we've done so far and why we did something and how come this happened and what are we going to do. So like a timeline would be great.
Perfect,
of just a document.
Yeah.
And then maybe a graphic with the 3 Saturday dates would just like, yeah, I think the more information, the better.
Yeah, I think that both the draft report and the PowerPoint that we use in support of the board meeting on Wednesday will answer those questions, and they'll be in the public right after that.
I have a question about the meeting on Wednesday.
You do have to have actual dates though, and not they, you know, have some fluidity with them. I think we've got to agree on the dates.
So is Wednesday a public meeting, or we're just presenting it to the board, or just Matrix?
It's a work session it's presenting the initial presentation to the board. It's a public meeting, but it's not for public comment, right, Mayor?
Right. So Wednesday's a work session. It's presented to the board because at the end, the board has to call a public meeting. It's a process. I mean, it's not just on this initiative, there are others on the agenda. And then we keep it open till we feel we've heard what we can. In this case, there's a deadline because of the April 1st deadline. Otherwise, we can keep them going for months if we wanted to, or hours. It just depends on how we vote. Most importantly, is open, it's recorded, it goes on the website, it's open to the public to hear everything. It's not a two-way dialogue, generally speaking, it's a presentation. So we would be asking the presenters, in this case, questions, clarification, et cetera, maybe a timeline is presented. To Christina's point, that might be a good time to say, this is some of the things we've done. This is where we're going. We're going to have 3 more meetings. So the public is engaged, not in a two-way dialogue, but it is communicative. And then my assumption is that we will vote. I don't see in my assumption, I'm like 99% sure, but I can't speak for all my colleagues technically. I will open for public, and then it'll be open for public hearings. Does that answer your question, okay? For the Wednesday?
If I could just add to what you said, Mayor, one non-obvious thing to me anyway, is that, and this is something that I had to learn when it comes to government, when I was first interested in it back in the day, is what is the difference between a work session and a legislative session, right? And it was a little bit of a not counterintuitive, is that a work session is when the trustees and the mayor work to discuss usually legislation, but any kind of issue that is, and it's a format that's less formal, right? Because we're having conversation amongst us legislators about how we feel about a topic, what we should consider, et cetera. The following week, all that is preparation for a legislative meeting in which we vote on legislation. And that legislation, we just discussed it the week prior. Now, the reason that it's not obvious is because during a work session, it's not work between the legislators and the public, it's work amongst the legislators that the public gets to view. The legislative session is when then it goes to the public before we vote on it, the public gets to comment, right? And so that's the difference between the two. And on Wednesday is a work session, and that's why there's not a public comment period on Wednesday.
Yeah, a work session, a decision cannot be made. They can't even really accept the report.
Right.
It's really an opportunity for the board to get more information about a topic that they can't get within the confines of a report, and they can have dialogue with the creator of the report to do that. So it sets the stage for later public meetings that you can do that at.
So who all is going to be involved in presenting? Is it like just you, Richard, or the whole team?
I would probably have members of my team contribute, but we don't have a lot of time. So the number of contributors can't be very large. It would be, I think, just it would be good to have somebody represent the working committee to be available, if not to talk a little bit about the work that the working committee did. So it's not just all coming from me.
So Richard, could you define for me what the right amount of time is?
Oh, well, I think 20 minutes is a little short.
So what would be the right amount of time?
Realizing that you've got a, I assume, a fairly busy work session schedule. I think we could do it in 30 minutes, realizing that there's going to be questions and answers after that.
So you'll have 30, when you say we don't have a lot of time,
It's still not a
I
lot.
don't know what that means. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
make space for a reasonable amount of time. So 30 minutes.
I
is
think
fine
30
with
minutes
me.
would
I
be
just-
reasonable.
30 minutes, okay.
That would give us time to talk about the process, and obviously the process, the backwards process and the forward process is important, but to talk about the substance of what's in the report as well. And I mean, we're not going to be able to get into a lot of depth. The board has that report. That's the question, Mayor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks, Omar. So they will be in a position to ask questions, having had a preliminary review of the report themselves.
Yes.
Okay, great. So that'll be good.
One recommendation that I would have is if you can speak amongst yourselves to have a representative from each of the subcommittees,
Yeah.
at least attend the work session, because if the trustees say so it says this and it references the subcommittee. Richard can't answer what happened during that subcommittee conversation, but maybe we can pull somebody in and you can add more commentary.
Well, Richard could, but Richard shouldn't. I think it would. I think it's a great
There you go.
to have a representative that we can talk about at this meeting represent each one of the committees.
And I don't mean to be rude or anything like that, but I hope it's clear to everyone that everyone can be on Zoom and attend this, correct? So that everyone can attend. The more the merrier. This is how public officials hear from their constituents. I think for the sake of just a productive presentation, and Omar's point is terrific, of assigning somebody so we can pull on a person to represent people, that might just be amongst you guys efficient. But clearly all of you are welcome to be on the Zoom call and then some.
So let me suggest this. Maybe the representatives of each one of the committees can nominate or suggest one of you to represent each one of the committees. And then I will get a draft PowerPoint done tomorrow sometime, and then get it to each of you as well as to my consulting team. And maybe we can have a brief conversation on Wednesday. I know that's going to be tough, but a lot of meetings, but at least we could just have a few minutes to discuss the presentation and what everybody's role is going to be. And if agreeing to a time is difficult, we can do it serially as well with individuals.
Sounds good.
Okay. So why don't I just suggest, unless you say otherwise, let's say noon Eastern time on Wednesday, we'll have a Zoom call for purposes of having the presenting team have just a half an hour to talk about the presentation, say. And if that doesn't work for any designated representatives, we can have a separate conversation.
When will we come up with the representatives?
Tonight or tomorrow.
I nominate Kendall for internal operations.
Oh.
You saw that coming, Kendall.
I was going to nominate Jackie.
That was very that's very nice.
Jackie, would you be willing to do that?
I think it should be you, Kendall, honestly.
Okay.
What about for policies?
I'll do the policies.
Okay, Gabby?
Thanks, Gabby.
What about governance?
Ro or Althema, would you be interested?
No.
Thank you for your honesty.
Good thing.
I actually think Pastor Jones would be good, but he's not here tonight, so I don't want to volunteer him.
Yeah, he couldn't make it.
What about you?
Sorry, me?
Yeah, I think you should do it.
I think you'd be great
Oh,
for
I would not
Jennifer.
like to do that. That sounds terrifying.
You can put forward the motion and second it then. What about training and hiring?
I can do that one.
Okay. Great. So,
So we have no one for governance yet.
Yeah. That's Jennifer, right?
Oh, did we say that?
I thought we did.
Let's see if Reverend Jones would like to do it, or unless Althema, I assume Althema's staying silent because she doesn't want to do it. If Pastor Jones says no, I will do it.
You could tag team it too. It's a large area in the study. I mean, there's a lot of distinct, there's the transparency part, there's a governance part, there's a complaint part. I think maybe you feel uncomfortable talking about the complaint parts given your role on the the review board?
I actually just feel uncomfortable with the public speaking aspect of it.
You've been doing such a great job.
Yeah, but this is a small group.
All right, well, Jennifer, can you talk to Reverend and maybe Althema, and you guys can figure out how you want to do it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I can do that time, and I will if nobody else would rather do it.
Okay. Any other process things?
When would the meeting be? That would be on Wednesday, prior to the meeting, the pre-meeting. When is that? What time would that be?
Does noon work for you? That was just a suggestion. We can do anytime.
Wednesday at noon. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, and that gives us time to do a little preparation on both sides of that meeting. All right. The report itself. So we have received some emails from several of you, including a couple of versions with track changes that had suggested edits, some of them wording and grammatical types of things, but some of them suggestions about clarification about existing suggested recommendations that are in there. There were a couple of questions about the level of description that we might want to have about implementation. We have taken a pretty summary approach in the report to refer to the amount of time we feel it could take to go from accepting the recommendation for implementation and its complete implementation. Some of them are many of them are relatively simple processes. Some of the things are going to take a couple of years, like the alternative response idea, would have a lot of different elements and steps associated with it, which we assumed the definition of which would be part of the planning that would be initiated once it was accepted as a recommendation to move forward. So that's why we did what we did. Perhaps we could put a little more detail in there for some of those, but that's what we did. So any comments about that? And then open it up to what's in there, because what we did for the suggested recommendations was to take the work of the subcommittees and do some research and to lay out a common structure for all of these recommendations that gave a little bit of information about the issue, some background as to why this is important in the whole discussion in Austining and nationally on police reform. Our interpretation based on our work and from how it rose within each subcommittee about its priority, and in terms of high, medium, low kind of priority, and something about time frame and whether there were cost implications. So we like the idea of having some common framework to discuss each of these things. And I think we all took pretty good notes, and those were the areas that we discussed. So now would be the time to talk about whether there were some additional initiatives that should be considered, whether we do that in the next 24 hours or do that as part of what's coming up. I think that's probably where we should open it up. So you want to talk generally first, and then we can go through each one of the 4 areas? What makes sense to you?
Go for it.
Okay. So again, I think in terms of like specifics, especially on the setup stuff, if we can just continue to get the emails and maybe separate calls, I think that would be great, because otherwise we'll probably be here for another 3 hours. Did my description about the implementation process make sense to everybody as it exists in the report right now?
Yes, to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think it might be helpful to define what the time frame is, like, before you get into that part. Because I made an assumption and then I was like, oh wait, this could be something entirely different than what I'm thinking it is.
That's a good point. That makes a lot of sense. We'll certainly do that. Any comments about the whole governance area, the governance complaint process and transparency sections that we have in there?
There were a couple, and I still need to send in my edits. I'm sorry about that. There were a couple of like tweaks that I had just about what the current status is, and what the proposals were pretty much the same. But I did notice, because people in the survey said that the process of making a complaint seemed difficult. I was thinking that might be something that we want to talk about making easier. You know, like right now, there's a form, you send in that form, and you know, you have to submit that form in person. Technically, you can bring it to Village Hall, but I don't think people are generally aware of that. So if we had an online process, I think that would take a lot of the burden off of people and maybe make people a little bit less reticent to send in complaints.
Didn't we had a recommendation in there to facilitate that? Maybe when you make your specific suggestions, if there's ways of making that stronger, go ahead and do that.
There wasn't one, but we can add that silently.
I thought we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd also be curious. I don't know how the repeal of 50A interacts with that. So just playing out scenarios, if we're in a world where all complaints against an officer are made public and someone makes a complaint online, what is the level of identification that would be required? And of course, there's a tension there, right? Because if someone has to identify themselves, maybe they would be less likely to report. But then on the other hand, then you're increasing the possibility of having unfounded accusations made against an officer that you can't respond to that are then made public, right? So I would just be curious about exploring.
Yeah, so 50A being repealed means that we can make complaints public. I don't love that idea because our police force is very small. So it makes me personally a little bit uncomfortable to have all of the complaints against any officer made public in the way that some other municipalities are considering. But I don't know if other people have other thoughts about it.
Richard, did you say that that we're open for review on this for 24 hours? Did you mention that, or?
If we're going to make any changes before it goes to the board, or be aware of changes that you think are important, since the board already has the report, then I'd like to be able to get our thoughts in together before the meeting. So yeah, 24 hours.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, that's not a lot of time, I realize.
No, but it would give us more time to further review.
Okay.
You know.
Right. Unless
Go ahead, sorry, Richard. I made a few recommendations and everything over the weekend. I know for oversight, governance, transparency, for example, one thing I thought that that I saw a lot of other municipalities and police departments are doing is like, for example, creating a policy not to include criminal records or other swayings, what they call that information, about people filing a complaint when that's shared with the CPCRB, for example. So, you know, that's one thing I recommended for that. Also, that the VBOT receive a quarterly updates on councils from either CPCRB chair or from council or something on the updates and what's happened. I think those were the with the two the two big ones that I recommended for that, or
Yeah,
kind of new ones.
those were great suggestions, so we can definitely incorporate that.
I just want to quickly mention to the group, I sent in just really minor, some small edits over the weekend, just in terms of getting the name right of the Loft LGBTQ Community Center, Austin LGBTQ Alliance. I did make a note on, I believe it was page 12. It just grouped in, it said students with special needs, comma, LGBTQ, and obviously you can be a student with special needs and LGBTQ, and you can be LGBTQ student who does not have special needs. So I just wanted to make that clear so that that doesn't go out to the public. I know it was probably just a minor thing. So, and I think Ro brought up in an email, and it was kind of echoed, we may want to include a list of partnering organizations either at the end or suggested that we think would work well to help move some of these recommendations along, whether it be Open Door or Ro mentioned a couple of them in the email. It doesn't mean that we, you know, they would have to agree with, but maybe it could just be suggestions of, we have so many great local organizations that could help support this. We may want to include a list.
We'll need your help, all of your help on that, but that's a good idea. Okay.
Also for training, something I recommended that I saw a lot of other municipalities are also enacting is actual training on what community policing is, especially from like a hands-on perspective, like have, you know, new members do like 2 hours or, you know, certain amount of hours, which I'm sure they're already doing, or even doing way more than that, but something of hands-on as they start as part of their training, something like that. And then another thing I was just curious about, I guess, is we mentioned, you know, obviously there's implicit bias and a bunch of other trainings that a lot of places don't have that where OPD is already doing. But then I'm wondering, what about the process of actually, like, how do we know, what, like, Chief, what do you do to know that these trainings are already kind of, you know, meeting the best practices, or that they're as updated as they should be, kind of thing, kind of ideas, you know? Because I know that's one thing we didn't really touch so much on.
So implicit bias, the instructor we used came directly from the White House. He's the person that wrote the report for the 21st Century Policing Project. So he's generally regarded as the top expert on the topic. He's a nationally published. He's a professor for many, many years at Morehouse College. He was on President Obama's task force. So I don't know if you can really get more elite than that. We trust in experts. So that's going to be my answer to that one. I can't tell you how I know if he's a better or worse instructor than someone else in that particular topic, other than that his resume speaks, I think, for itself. In terms of the effectiveness of other trainings, I think that varies from topic to topic. I don't think that there is right now a mechanism for testing people's implicit bias after the training's been done. That's the study that's going on right now with Yale Law School. I'm anxious to see those results because they're interesting, at least their hypothesis. In terms of other trainings, you know, it depends on the topic and how we test that. In terms of use of force training, that shows by the results of calls for service and how people use the tools that they're given. In terms of CPR, there's a mechanism for testing that in terms of medical aids that we go on and how effective people are in using that appropriately. So I think that that's a tough one to answer in the broad sense, because each tool is tested in its own unique way. Some of them, I don't believe that there are mechanisms out there to test right now, but in terms of how we decide whether or not the trainings that we're giving are appropriate to law enforcement or to our department in particular, every training that we give, if it's state mandated, has to be to their spec. Otherwise, it doesn't qualify for accreditation purposes. And for all of the trainings we do that go above and beyond that, we typically will canvass nationwide to find the best models we can for those courses.
And Chief, after let's say 6 months or so, like how do you review, like for example, if there's something new that has come out in that area or something like that, do you update it like once a year kind of thing, or review it once a year for updates or anything like that?
Our curriculum changes for most of those courses year to year. We wouldn't do the same exact use of force program from one year to the next, because putting people through the same scenarios isn't helpful. A lot of times the scenarios that we give are based on national trends. For instance, in years where there have been a lot of school shootings, or that's a national topic, that's been one of our big use of force. Or when we do simunitions, where we're doing live fire exercises, used force on force, those have been issues. Defensive tactics, if there's an issue we see in the news, that's something that gets put forth. The tactics we train are the same. The scenarios that we're providing them in are typically tailored to whatever the topics of the day are. So those change every single time. There'd be no purpose in putting people through the same scenario year after year after year. They would just keep seeing the same thing.
Thank you, Chief.
I have a comment on for transparency purposes. I think it would be very useful if we can have all of this that Chief Sylvester is saying on a website or on the village website or the OPD website, so that anyone who has questions about this, right, like they might not be able to go to OPD, or they're just wondering what training does OPD have, even people who are considering maybe applying to be police officers can look into what type of training they do here in Ossining. So that I think that would be very useful, and for the community, as well as maybe prospective police officers for Ossining. And then I also had some questions about the training piece. In the training and hiring subcommittee, we did do a lot of work together in terms of thinking about what types of trainings we recommend for the community. And I think it would be very useful to have that list that John put together, where we kind of came up with like an order of what we thought was more important or more urgent. So I think there were like 8 or 10 trainings that we thought that OPD should look into. And so that would be useful to have on here. Maybe I didn't get to that part yet because I haven't had time to finish reading, but I didn't see that on here. So one of my recommendations is adding the list that we came up with, so that that's also transparency for the community to see what we worked on as a subcommittee, as well as the piece where we have the key themes arising from Ossining Police Department personnel. It says that many officers could benefit from additional training, and most feel that they would benefit from additional training. And I'm wondering if it's possible, or if you have the types of training that officers feel that they need. Because I think that's very important to add in there, because you know, being an officer and if they feel like they need training, I want to know what they feel they lack or need more information on.
Yeah. We didn't do an employee survey in the police department, but we did interview quite a few of them. So that's where we got that statement from. So we can embellish that with the feedback we got.
Maite, the trainings you were talking about, did you say those were for the community?
No, so the training and hiring subcommittee, we came up with different trainings that we think that OPD should adopt, right? Like that they should send.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I like on here, it's I have page 8. It's like the end of page 7 and 8, where it talks about hiring and training. There's only like 3 bullet points, but it doesn't say like work to increase diversity in department hiring promotional processes. You know, introduce a program at the high school, multi-year training plan, but what training plan are we suggesting is not on here? Oh, I see it here, but I feel we came up with a longer list.
Okay, we can add to it based on what you guys talked about at the committee meeting.
Please.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Also with the policies and procedures, are we leaving this one? The department should modify its general orders to include OPD officers will not respond with ICE unless they are called to the location. I would like to add unless they are called by a witness other than ICE. So it could be if a community member calls OPD to the scene, then they can arrive. But if ICE is the one calling, or if, right, so we were talking about not wanting OPD to show up
Yeah.
when ICE is at a call.
We may need to talk about that one a little bit more, because I can easily envision situations in which an ICE member would need some assistance, but an external entity wouldn't if they were inside a building or something like that.
Just my perspective, I wouldn't recommend that, because if you do that, you limit possibilities. And what if ICE goes there and discovers that there's child abuse and they want the PD to investigate that? Or ICE goes there and finds something else going on aside from the detainer that they may be trying to go with. So if you do that, you could seriously affect community safety that you can't envision now in a policy way. Because we don't know what ICE may discover there, and they may be getting assaulted and ask for help, and the police can arrive and restore peace, or they may spot another crime. So if you put that limitation on there, that could really, I think, jeopardize community safety, especially with the immigrant community.
I'm trying to think of a way to make kind of like the intent work in a way that would actually work in practice. What if it was like the PD wouldn't automatically show up preemptively with ICE? That had to be a request either from ICE once they're at the scene, or a community member at the scene.
Right, being that's there, right? I'm not saying beforehand, once they're there.
Right.
But I think the policy outlined that they wouldn't respond. That was the recommendation from the committee. They wouldn't respond with ICE unless called to the scene. But I think putting an additional limitation on there really might not serve the purpose. I mean, what if they come to a domestic assault and they're there to serve their administrative function, and they discover some other crime occurring? They're not going to investigate it. ICE won't. So OPD would need to come there.
Yeah.
So I would just be really cautious about putting that extra limitation on there.
Well, I mean, as I'm looking, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't have a chance to look at this. I was planning on reading this more thoroughly after the meeting today, because it's been a very hectic weekend. But I will say the section on the policy and procedure doesn't really detail especially since this is due to police reform, due to the, change due to the racism inside of the police reform. So as I'm looking at the policies, we talk a lot about that, but in the description of the things to be highlighted, and I understand if we're not able to talk about specific policies, but it should encompass more. It should mention all of that discussion that we had about all of the different things, and even the LGBTQ, that there's still work being done on these policies, because the policies were too big. It was too much to do all of them within this short period of time. Right.
We'll look at that again with that in mind. I know it's mentioned, both of those elements that you spoke of, and
Policies part, it doesn't, I don't see it in the
maybe
policies.
weren't specific enough. So John and I and Ian will take a look at that.
Hmm.
Okay, anything else? Okay, if not, remember, we're open for calls, emails, whatever, to discuss this further. We are going to have another meeting tomorrow at noon your time. I actually appreciated the time we spent talking today about the process, because I think that helped cement in my mind what we're going to do, but also it got what was important to the mayor and all of you about the best way to roll this out. So we also got some specific decisions about the meeting. So thank you for that part of the discussion.
Sorry, Richard, I do have one last question about the process,
Yeah.
which is, you know, after people engage in public comment, after seeing everything, and, you know, people start sending recommendations or whatever, how is it determined what goes on the plan or what gets taken off the plan, et cetera? How is that, what's that process and how is that finalized, et cetera?
So in addition to the public meetings that will be held on it, we will be getting emails and phone calls as we have been up to this point. We will use within our team our professional judgment about the things that fit within the plan and what we had laid out within the subcommittee, and come to the working committee before we finalize it with specific changes that we're going to ask you to be accept for adoption into it. Maybe one way to do it would be to clearly highlight the changes that we propose within the document, so that we're not just talking about the base document, but really focusing on the changes that we're proposing through check changes or some other method.
Changes meaning both additions and omissions then, right?
Correct. Changes, deletions, and additions.
Thank you.
So I just want to, before we go, because I'm got my calendar open, and so I want to make sure I have this right. We have this Wednesday, the 27th, is going to be the work session where you're going to present the work that was done. February 13th is the first general public meeting. Then there's the 20th and the 27th. 20th being the Spanish speaking would be on the 27th.
27th.
I'm sorry?
27th for Spanish speaking.
Okay. And the 20th, that's with the NAACP meeting?
Yes.
African American community. Okay. And then March 1st is kind of what we're aiming for
sometime between March 1st and March 15th, roughly.
Okay.
We will compile the input and evaluate that input for inclusion in the plan. And we will have a working committee meeting sometime before we submit it to the board, the middle of March, for your okay, for it to be submitted to the board for their adoption and submission to the state.
Got it. Cool. Okay. That just going over again helps.
And then,
I was just gonna say can we say between the 1st and the 10th?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And then, so once this is presented to the board, how long do they have to vote? So they'll have from March until April 1st to finish?
As a practical matter, they're going to need a few days to take all of this. Typically in a situation like this, a village, town, or city would take a report like this and put a cover letter over it. That's an official action from the board. And maybe some other documents, I don't know, and submit it. So they need a few more days. So I'd say if the objective was to get it to the state before April 1st, so say a couple of days before April 1st, then they need to have whatever we're going to give them by, say, the 15th, so they have a week or so to do that.
Okay. So then, so the community also only has about a week to give their suggestions to the board, or maybe, I don't know if Omar.
But they have all February.
All of February to talk to the board. That's those weekend meetings.
Yes, but you're right. There will be a public board meeting for purposes of accepting all of this, for which there will be public input. So whatever that meeting eventually is in March, that it takes the final report, then that's open for public comment.
Okay, yeah, because I feel like we're still reviewing, like Gabby said, some policies. We're still reading and making sure that everything that is on the draft that we want on the report to be on there. So,
Right.
you know, it's going to be.
Yeah, if I can, oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, go ahead.
So just in terms of timing, one important thing is that in March, the legislative sessions are the 3rd and the 17th. And so we vote during legislative sessions. So if we would need to, if let's say you had it for the work session on the 10th, then it would need to be ready by the 5th so that we could discuss it on the 10th and then vote on it on the 17th.
Okay. Thank you. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're sorry. Can you just say that again? So you're voting on the 17th? No, yeah.
We vote on the 17th. We discuss it on the 10th, and so we would need to have it ready to put it in the agenda. The agenda goes out the Friday before the work session, so the 5th.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
So in that case, do we want to have the meeting for the Spanish speakers sooner than the 27th? Because that's only a few days.
We could, but I think we could turn around the input pretty quickly. I think the important part is that we only have from whenever we take all this input and make the changes to the report, we only have a limited amount of time to have a working committee meeting for you guys to sign off on it. So that's going to have to be the 3rd or 4th of March.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have my calendar in front of me. What days of the week are that?
So Wednesday and Thursday.
The 3rd or 4th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Friday's
maybe the 4th or something. We can have a working committee.
Richard, can we also specify that this time when we have the meeting for the African American community, that it is promoted as such and not a meeting with the NAACP, but a meeting with the Ossining African American community? You know, the NAACP is essential in this process, but it is just one organization, and to have a conversation with a community is not to have a conversation with one organization. So please specify this time that this is for the African American community.
I will mention that to Jamie and to Karen tomorrow. Thanks. Okay, everybody.
Actually, Richard, one last thing, I promise.
Yeah, no worries.
Just kind of going from that, I do feel if we are going to be representing, and we have been representing and everything, I would love it if you could also talk to Jamie and Karen about us getting a pass-through look at the marketing and everything that might go out and everything, just so that it makes sense and everything.
Okay.
If you want to,
Good idea, Rodolfo.
Yeah.
I could send you Jamie's email, or you could share it with us. She's really been really responsive.
Really has.
I talked to her on the phone when planning the meeting that I put together, because there were some, issues with just the language and some confusion there. It was kind of like playing a game of telephone. So, we could definitely, I think, reach out directly to her too is a big help.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll shoot that right over. Actually, I could just put it in the chat right now. Just give me a minute.
That's it. Thanks for seeing.
Mr. John.
Okay. Well, this has been a really good meeting. Thank you. Thank you for the work getting your thoughts to us on the draft report before this. So we still have a lot of work to do, so I appreciate your help. We'll talk to some of you tomorrow. So give me the names of who's going to be on, represent each one of the subcommittees, and I'll get a Zoom invite out for tomorrow at lunch.
Kendall will be there.
Apparently. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great evening.
Take care.
Bye.
You too. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks.